Hi everyone, welcome back, it's Benno again, and today we're going to talk a bit about materials in Blender and the shading tab that you see here open before me. Before we start to talk about materials, we have to talk about viewport shading. The viewport, that is the scene in the middle here that we see, and the viewport shading options are on the top right, these four buttons here. Currently, I have solid display mode enabled, which is the fastest way to see our scene because it doesn't actually do much light processing or material processing, so it renders very fast. And it's great to position your objects, but we don't actually see our materials that I've assigned to these objects at all. For that, we actually have to go and enable the rendered display view. So the preview of our materials here, and if I have that, then I can actually see all of the surface materials I have assigned. This is substantially slower to work with and render with, so very often you want to actually be in the grayscale preview mode and only enable this to check if everything looks correct. But so long you don't have too much going on in your scene, it should be fine to also work in this mode. To change the material that is assigned to an object, you want to go to the Material Editing tab here in the Properties. And there we have usually this basic material assigned. Currently that is on the cylinder here. And if I want to change that, I can go here and open the drop down, then change this material, for example, to my blue material. If you're just starting out, you probably don't have a material yet. So in order to create one, what we can do is click on the X here to unlink that material from the object. And then we get a new button where we can just make a new material, call that whatever you want. Call this yellow material. And then I can change the color in the base color property of the material here. And I'll just drag that over to be yellow, and now I have a yellow material on my cylinder here. And then you can see the material appearing here in the drop-down list, so I can change it back to my blue material if I want that. We can also add multiple materials to the same object. I can add a new material slot by clicking the plus icon here. However, by default, every object will only use the first material slot. If we actually want to use multi-materials on an object, we would have to say which of the surfaces would use which material. For that, I would have to go into the Modeling tab and then select, for example, this face here of the cylinder. Of course, I have to go into the preview to actually see what I'm doing on the materials. Then I can go to Materials, go to the blue material and click Assign here. And then that will assign the blue material just to that face. So now my cylinder has two materials assigned. The first yellow material, that is slot number 0. We start counting those as 0 as well. So the first material slot is slot index 0. Yellow material is on the sides, and material slot 1, the blue material, the second material that's on the top. The mesh itself from the cylinder now knows to put material slot 0 on the sides and material slot 1 on the top. This will actually cause you no issues at all doing this in Blender, but if you export your 3D model that has multiple materials assigned to it, you should check if the software that you plan to import it on actually supports multi-materials. Now, what is a material directly? It's basically a combination of a set of input values, like the color blue that I assigned, and a processing algorithm or set of algorithms and a pipeline for our graphics to process that surface information and the surrounding information from the scene, like lighting, for example, and shadows, to create the surface for our object. So kind of the surface setup if you want. The surface setup that we use right now, the principled BSDF, is the standard one for Blender. That stands for bidirectional scattering distribution function, and that's just a fancy way of saying this algorithm calculates how light interacts with the surface. To explain what a BSDF simulates, just very simplified, it's a bit like what we can see here. Light comes in from a light source and it interacts with the surface. So some of it gets reflected and some of it gets absorbed. Based on what gets absorbed, the surface is lighter or darker. And based on the direction of the reflection, if it's like all chaotic in all kinds of directions or more straight, the surface will look shiny or rough. So back in Blender, we can click here on the surface model that we use, and if you don't want to use the principled BSDF, there's a whole bunch of other ones predefined, or if you know how to, you can even add your own shader, a shader that is the program that runs for rendering the object. And we can also see the other surface properties here, the metallicness, that is the reflectivity of an object. Broadly speaking, roughness means how clear an object's reflection is. If it's very rough, the light rays all are reflected chaotically, so there is no clear reflection at all. And if it's very smooth, so there's a low roughness, then we can see clear reflections. In order to see any reflections at all being rendered, though, we actually have to change our rendering model, which we're gonna do in a future video. For now, let's stick to the principled BSDF and the base color of your choosing, and then metallicness of 0. And let's go to the shading tab. In here, we can actually change all of the inputs of our surface model with different kinds of algorithm, different kinds of input, or even texture files. First, you want to make sure that the material that you want to edit is selected here. And I want to edit the brick material here, which I have been teasing with all this video long, the cube in the middle that has this brick texture applied to it. So how did I do that? You can see in the editor window for my material here that I attached a texture input node to the base color of my principled BSDF node. To do this, let me first delete the image node here. I just press delete on the keyboard, and then I click add and texture and image texture, which gives me a new node that takes in an image from my computer. To open an image, well, you just click open. And then here I have this bricks texture that I can just open. There we go. And now I just click drag my node for the color into the base color. Voila, there we go. Now we have an image. Wonderful. So that is how you apply a material to an object, how you change its color properties, a little bit about lighting and what a BSDF is as well, and how to use a texture file as well. Now we can actually see here that the texture file is differently aligned on the cube and the cylinder, and that is because of the UV layout of those objects. The UV layout sort of describes the way that the texture is wrapped around the surface of that object. UV layouting and UV editing is a topic on its own though, so we're going to talk about that in a future video.